He just called fire from heaven. Hundreds of false prophets gone. The greatest miracle of his generation done. And then he ran 3 days into the wilderness, collapsed under a juniper tree, and he uttered 5 words: "It is enough. I'm done." That's Elijah, the man who called fire from heaven, asking God to let him die. And in that cave, God didn't send a sermon, he sent bread, which means the question you came in here with today, does he actually hear me, is not a crisis of faith. That's the oldest case in the file, and we're going to follow the evidence. This file will not close until we have a verdict and you have answers. So let me tell you what happened in that cave. God told Elijah to go stand on the mountain, and then 3 things happened. There was a great wind, so powerful that it broke rocks in pieces. There was an earthquake, and there was a fire. 3 supernatural events, and God wasn't in any of them. And then a still small voice. The silence that you've been experiencing, it may not be absence. It may be positioning. Elijah was looking for God in the spectacular, the wind, the earthquake, the fire. Those are things that we typically recognize as divine. Why? Because they're dramatic, they're undeniable, and they're visible. But remember, God wasn't in any of them. He was in the whisper. Now, here's the question that needs to go on the record. What are you listening for? Because if you're waiting for the earthquake, you might be standing in the middle of the answer right now, but you're not hearing it. Why is that, you're asking? The anatomy of silence has 2 components. Component number 1 is silence as absence. That's the interpretation that you came in with, that he doesn't hear you. He hasn't answered. You're off the radar. But you see, that interpretation has no evidence to support it. Not in the text, not in this case, and not in Elijah's file. Now, component number 2 is silence as preparation. Yah gave Elijah bread before he gave him instruction. He gave him provision before purpose. He gave him a reset before the assignment. The bread came first. That's the sequence. And that sequence actually answers the question of whether he hears you or not. He heard Elijah collapse. He sent an angel before Elijah said another word. Before the request, before the prayer, before the petition, he sent bread. That's not a God who doesn't hear. That's a God who heard before you even finished the sentence. If Exhibit A just answered something you've been carrying, I want you to mark it. Hit the like button right now. It tells the investigation where the evidence is actually landing. Now we need to talk about how God communicates when he goes silent. Because Elijah didn't just receive bread, he received 3 distinct frequencies. And those 3 frequencies are still active in your file and in your life. Frequency 1, provision. The angel touched Elijah and said, "Arise and eat." No sermon, no explanation, no theological treatise. Let me ask you, when was the last time you received something practical, unexpectedly, and may have dismissed it as coincidence? Put it back in your file, because provision is communication. Yah is not always going to send a vision. Sometimes he sends rent money. Sometimes he sends a call from someone that you haven't talked to in a number of years. Sometimes he sends a scripture on a random day that answers the exact thing that you couldn't say out loud. That's frequency number 1. And it's often missed because we're listening for the earthquake. Now, frequency number 2 is presence. Remember, the angel touched Elijah a second time, told him to arise and eat because the journey is too great for you. That second touch is not provision. That's presence. Yah didn't tell Elijah where he was going. He didn't explain the plan, didn't give him a 3-year strategy. He simply said, the road ahead is long and you need strength. That's frequency number 2. It doesn't explain, it sustains. And if you've been asking for an explanation, but you're receiving sustenance, that's not silence. Frequency number 3, the question. This is the one that most people entirely miss. When Elijah reached the cave, God asked him something. He said, "What are you doing here, Elijah?" Now, something that's interesting, and I came across this as I was preparing this case. Mount Horeb is the mount that Moses had his experience when he encountered Yah and Yah spoke to him out of the burning bush. Elijah is looking for Yah at the place someone else had an experience. Are you guilty of doing that same thing? Expecting God to meet you in the same way and the same place that you heard someone else had an experience. Understand, Yah is omniscient. That's a theological word meaning all-knowing. He knew exactly where Elijah was. So why ask? Because the question is the answer. Yah's response to Elijah's despair was not a theological correction. It was an invitation to articulate his pain. Say it, name it, and then file it. Do you remember when Adam and Eve fell in the garden? Yah came looking and he asked Adam a question. He called out to Adam. He said, "Adam, where are you?" Again, Yah is not asking because he didn't know where Adam was. He needed Adam to identify where Adam was. And in many cases, this is our experience as well. We have to identify where we are in relationship to our journey with the Father. Think about Romans chapter 8, verse 26. It says that the Spirit itself makes intercession for us with groanings which cannot be uttered. See, when we don't have the words, when you can't form the prayer, when the case file, when life is too heavy, the Spirit is already filing the prayer on your behalf. Again, that's not silence. That's a frequency that you haven't been trained to recognize. 3 frequencies: provision, presence, and the question. All 3 were present in Elijah's cave, and all 3 are present in yours. So before the verdict, let's address the objections. There are 3 that come up every time this case gets opened. Objection number 1. I've been asking for years and nothing. Remember, Elijah ran for 3 days before the angel appeared. 3 days of wilderness, 3 days of silence, 3 days before the bread. You see, the answer didn't come on his timeline. It came at the necessary junction of the journey. Your years may be your 3 days, but the bread is already in transit. Objection number 2. Maybe I'm not chosen. This is a biggie for a lot of people. Elijah, the man who just called fire from heaven, is asking God to let him die. He says, I'm not better than my fathers. But understand this: selection in this case is not based on your performance. Neither is your relationship with the Father. It's not based on your performance. It's based on his selection. Not your track record, not your consistency, and not your spiritual resume. Yah sent the angel before Elijah cleaned himself up, before he repented, before he got back to the assignment. Now, many faith communities teach you that God won't hear you if you have sin in your life. But the reality is, the only way to get the sin out of your life is that Yah has to be moving and working in your behalf. This is why we're examining this case, because many people are carrying condemnation that they ought not to carry. Before Elijah cleaned himself up, Yah sent the angel. The bread came to a man who was ready to quit. And if you're ready to quit, don't. Here's objection number 3. I don't even know how to pray anymore. We already looked at Romans 8:26. And remember, it says groanings which cannot be uttered. The Spirit doesn't require you to be articulate, doesn't require the right words, the right theology, or the right posture. A groan is enough. File it. I can't mention the amount of people who say, I don't know how to pray. There is no right or wrong way to pray. Prayer is just communication with the Father. You talk to him and he responds back. So let's look at the verdict, because here is what the evidence establishes. Elijah collapsed in the wilderness and he asked to die. God didn't argue with him, didn't correct him, didn't lecture him on faith. Elijah sat in a cave and rehearsed his failure. Yah didn't contradict him. He asked a question. What are you doing here? The verdict is not complicated. You were never off of Yah's radar. The silence that you experienced or are experiencing was not God going dark. It was God repositioning. The bread is in transit. The presence is active, and the question is already filed. Here is where the prosecution is going to rest. If you clicked in here today feeling like your prayers hit the ceiling, I want you to take all of this evidence back and review it and apply it to your life. Elijah's prayers hit the wilderness, but Yah found him there, and Yah has found you here. The evidence log is open. There's one question for the record. It's a yes or no. Has there been even one moment, just one, where you knew Yah heard you, even when everything said otherwise? I want you to drop it below. Just one line. There's no sermon required. And if this file answered something that you've been carrying, I want you to send it to someone whose life, whose case needs it. The next investigation opens soon. The file stays open. Be sure to subscribe to the channel and leave your testimony in the comments. Stay blessed.